This was March 2020, back when the virus was still mostly a rumor on the news, and nobody in rural Iowa was taking it seriously yet. I was working for a refrigeration outfit out of Kansas City, industrial stuff, ammonia systems, big evaporators, walk-in coolers the size of gymnasiums. We got sent to a pork plant about 40 minutes south of Cedar Rapids. Small town, 1 Casey's, 1 bar, a Dollar General. The plant was the only reason the town existed. Everybody there either worked at it, was married to someone who did, or had quit. The job was a full retrofit on the cooler side, 4 to 5 days depending on how bad the existing pipe was. Our crew was me, a lead named Dallas, and 2 younger guys they'd sent up from Springfield. I'd been doing this kind of install for 9 years. Plants don't bother me. The smell doesn't bother me. You get used to it in a week, and after that it's just work. First day was mostly demo, pulling out the old evaporator coils, cutting the old lines, staging the new units on the floor. The plant kept running around us. That's how these jobs go. They can't afford to shut the line down. So you work around forklifts and pallets of packaged product moving 3 feet from your ladder. The plant made its own weather inside. Below the cooler line it was 52 degrees. Above it was 70 and wet. And the whole place smelled like bleach on top of something the bleach couldn't touch. Rail hooks moved on chains overhead. Air compressors kicked on every couple of minutes. If somebody yelled, you didn't hear it unless you were 5 feet from them. The workers ignored us. That's normal. You're an outsider in coveralls. You're in their way, and their supervisor is already annoyed you're on his floor. Nobody makes small talk, except one guy. I noticed him the second day, mid-morning. I was up on a scissor lift running new suction line along the ceiling, and I looked down and there he was, just standing there. White smock, hairnet, rubber boots. Older than the rest, maybe 50. Broad in the shoulders, but soft in the middle. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. I figured he was on break or waiting on parts. I nodded at him. He didn't nod back, didn't scowl either. His face just sat there like a face on a driver's license photo. I went back to work. When I looked down again, maybe 10 minutes later, he was still there. Same spot, same posture. Hands folded in front of him like he was at a funeral. I climbed down for a tool and walked past him, and he stepped aside without a word. I said, "How's it going?" He didn't answer. I read the name stitched into his smock. Something short. Marv or Marvin. Faded thread. I put it out of my head. Plants have weird guys. Every plant has at least 2. You've got the guy who talks too much, and the guy who won't talk at all. And if you're on the road as much as I've been, you learn to leave both of them alone. Around lunchtime, he was still there. When I ate my sandwich in the break area, he was gone. When I came back, he was back, standing about 15 feet off from wherever I was, watching my hands more than my face. That's the part that started to sit funny with me. He wasn't looking at what I was doing. He was looking at my hands. When I gripped a wrench, when I braced against a beam, when I pulled my gloves off to check a fitting. His eyes tracked my hands like he was studying them. I mentioned it to Dallas at the end of the day, in the parking lot. Dallas laughed. "Yeah, I got one too. Old boy in a smock, right? Kept following me around C Block." One of the Springfield kids said the same thing. He watched me eat lunch from across the room, just sat there with a coffee cup and stared. We laughed about it. You know how it is on a job site. Weird stuff becomes the joke of the week. We called him the foreman, as in our real foreman, not theirs. Hey, the foreman's watching, look busy, that kind of thing. Third day, I started paying closer attention. Not because I was worried yet, because it was interesting. He was doing rounds. That's the only way to describe it. He'd stand near me for maybe 20, 30 minutes. Then he'd walk off and I'd see him 10 minutes later standing near Dallas, then near the Springfield kids. He rotated, like a security guard, except no guard I've ever seen makes eye contact with a man's forearms for that long. He wasn't watching us work, he was measuring us. I want to be careful how I put this because at the time I couldn't have told you what I was seeing. It was more of a feeling that built up over the day. But by mid-afternoon on day 3, I was sure of it. He was comparing us. His eyes would go from my shoulders to Dallas's shoulders across the room. from one of the Springfield kids' hands to mine, head to head, waist to waist. I remember pulling my sleeves down over my wrists at one point without thinking about it. That was the first time I really felt the cold in my stomach, and it wasn't from the cooler. Day 4, we were on the last of the new coil installs. Long day. I had the ladder braced against a support column, and I was up there tightening a bracket when I felt him below me. I knew he was there before I looked. You just know when someone's standing at the base of your ladder. I looked down. He was maybe 8 feet away, at eye level with my boots, head tilted back. He was looking straight up at me, not at what I was doing, at me. His mouth was slightly open, not in a threatening way, in the way a person opens their mouth a little when they're focused on something small. I climbed down slowly. I made a point of turning my back to him to gather tools. I could feel him behind me. I turned around and he'd moved. He was standing at a rack of cutting tools about 15 feet away, pretending to check a clipboard. The clipboard was upside down. I want to say I confronted him. I didn't. What I did was walk into the break room and sit down for about 10 minutes and drink a coffee I didn't want. There's a way people can look at you that makes you feel like meat. Not in the horror movie way, in the practical way. Like someone at a hardware store looking at lumber for a specific job. The rest of that day I stayed near Dallas. Dallas noticed. He didn't say anything, but he stayed near me too. The Springfield kids stuck together on the other side of the cooler. Nobody talked about it, but we all knew. At the end of the shift, when the paperwork was getting signed off, I pulled the plant foreman aside. Big guy, mustache, name was Randy. I said, "Hey, that older guy in the white smock, kind of heavy, quiet, follows people around. What's his deal?" Randy looked past me. I watched his eyes find the guy across the floor. Marv was standing near the washdown station, back to us, but his head was turned just enough that you could tell he was listening. Randy's face did something small, a tightening around the mouth. Not surprised, tired. He said, "Yeah, I know about him. Old story." I waited. Randy didn't add anything. He just kept looking across the floor, and after a second, he turned back to me and stuck out his hand for the sign-off sheet. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I signed the paperwork. We loaded the truck. The Springfield kids were quiet on the drive back to the motel, and Dallas was quiet too. I remember stopping at a Casey's for gas and standing in the parking lot longer than I needed to, just because the air outside smelled like cold dirt and diesel instead of what the plant smelled like. I flew home the next morning. Didn't think about it much for a while. COVID hit that same week. All our jobs got pushed, and by April, I was sitting at home like everybody else, watching the news and drinking too much coffee. 4 months later, I was scrolling my phone in bed, and I saw the headline, local Iowa paper. A seasonal worker at that plant had gone missing. Guy from Guatemala, in his 20s, went to his shift on a Friday night and never came home. Car still in the lot, phone off, no signs of anything. Sheriff was asking for information. I read the article twice. My hands were doing that thing where you're holding a phone, but you're not really holding it anymore. I dug around online for a few minutes. There was a follow-up piece from a couple of weeks later. Nothing new on the missing man, but there was one line at the end, the kind of detail a reporter throws in because they've got nothing else. It said the plant had recently seen higher than usual turnover, including a long-time maintenance-adjacent worker who had put in his notice earlier that summer. No name, just that line. I closed the browser. I sat there for a while. I thought about calling somebody. The sheriff's office out there maybe. And then I thought about what I actually had to tell them. A man watched me install a cooler. He looked at my hands. My foreman said it was an old story. I never made the call. I don't know if that's on me or not. Sometimes when I'm on a new job and I catch somebody in my peripheral, standing a little too still, I check their hands before I check their face. I don't know when I started doing that. I just do it now. January in Buffalo has its own kind of quiet. The snow eats every sound outside the funeral home on Delaware, and by the time you get inside the prep room, the only thing you hear is the hum of the fluorescence in your own breathing. I'd been working there 8 years by that January, long enough to stop flinching. long enough to eat lunch at a desk that used to be next to the embalming table before we moved it out. The family came in on a Tuesday, 3 of them, 2 sons and a daughter, all somewhere in their 40s, coats still wet from the parking lot. Their father had died at home on hospice. No surprises. Congestive heart failure. The oldest son did most of the talking. He was polite in the way people are when they're holding it together on autopilot. Casket, viewing, one-day service, cremation after. Nothing complicated. He picked out a plain oak box and asked if we could keep the flowers simple because their mom didn't like lilies. I remember the daughter didn't say anything the whole meeting. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the carpet. That's not unusual. People go quiet. We got the body that same afternoon. His name was Ronald, and on paper he was 73, though he looked older than that. Thin, that papery skin you get after a long illness. I did the intake, Marcus did the embalming, and by Wednesday night Ronald was dressed in the navy suit his family had dropped off and laid in the casket in viewing room B. The service was scheduled for Thursday at 11. I got in around 8:30 that morning to do the final walkthrough. That's my routine. Coffee first, then the room. I check the lights, the chairs, the guest book, the register stand, the tissue boxes on the side tables. Make sure the temperature is right, because in January, we run the heat too high and the flowers wilt by noon. Then I check the deceased. Tie straight, hands right, hair the way the family asked. Ronald looked fine. That's the word I'd have used. Fine. The suit sat well on him. Marcus had done a nice job with the color on his face, and his hands were folded the way we do it, right over left, wedding ring visible. His mouth was closed and neutral. I'd cleaned his glasses the night before and set them on his chest because the daughter had asked for that specifically. I bent down to adjust the pocket square, and when I stood back up, his eyes were open, both of them, wide open, looking straight up at the ceiling. I want to be clear about something. This happens. Not often, but it happens. Muscles relax at different rates after death, and if the eye caps slip, or if the tissue behind the lid contracts a certain way, the eyelids can lift. 8 years in, I'd seen it maybe 4 or 5 times. Once with a woman in her 90s whose eyes opened while I was doing her makeup, and I actually said sorry out loud before I remembered, so I didn't panic. I set the coffee down on a side chair, went and got a small tube of adhesive from the prep room, came back and closed his eyes with my thumbs, gently, held them for a few seconds, dabbed a tiny amount of adhesive under each lid the way you're supposed to, stepped back, closed, fine. I finished the walkthrough, straightened a chair in the second row, turned the thermostat down a click, went back to the office to answer emails. The family was due at 10:30 for the private hour before the public service. At 10:20, I walked back into viewing room B to switch on the side lamps. His eyes were open again. Same as before, both lids up, gaze straight at the ceiling. Not a flutter, not a half-open thing, fully open. I stood in the doorway for maybe 5 seconds. Then I walked over. I'll say what I did in order because I want you to understand I wasn't sloppy. I checked the pulse points on his neck out of pure reflex, even though he'd been embalmed 40 hours earlier, and there was no possible pulse to check. Nothing. Skin cold. The exact cold of a body that's been in a room set to 64 degrees overnight. I checked for any chest movement. None. I put the back of my hand under his nose for longer than I needed to. Nothing at all. He was dead. Completely, unmistakably dead. There was no question about it, but his eyes were open. I closed them again. Same procedure. More adhesive this time, more than I usually use. I pressed the lids down and counted to 30. Then I counted to 30 again. When I let go, they stayed closed. I stepped back and watched him for about a minute. Nothing moved. The lids stayed down. 10:28. The family would be in the lobby any second. I did something I usually don't do. It's a procedure we learn in school, but almost nobody uses it anymore, because modern adhesives are supposed to be enough. I went to the prep room, opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet by the sink, and took out the curved needle and the fine suture thread. You go in through the inside of the lower lid, up through the upper lid, and back down. 2 stitches per eye if you want to be sure. It's invisible from the outside if you do it right. Nobody standing over the casket at a viewing can tell. I brought it back to the room and did it standing up, leaning over him. My hands were steady. That's the part I remember most clearly. My hands were not shaking at all. I was thinking about the daughter, actually. I was thinking about how she'd asked for the glasses on his chest, and how she was going to lean over him in about 15 minutes, and I wanted her to see her father with his eyes closed like he was sleeping. I finished the second eye at 10:34, wiped down his face with a clean cloth, put the glasses back exactly where they had been, closed the casket lid halfway, the way we do when the family walks in, so they can see him but from a distance first. The oldest son knocked on the door at 10:36. The service went the way services go. The daughter cried, the younger son didn't. The oldest one gave a short talk about their father, teaching him how to change the oil on a car when he was 11. There were maybe 40 people. A woman I assumed was the widow sat in the front row in a wheelchair and held a folded handkerchief the whole time and didn't use it once. At one point during the visitation, before the service started, the daughter went up to the casket alone and stood there for a long time with her hand on her father's hand. She looked at his face. She adjusted his glasses a fraction of an inch. She didn't react to anything. Nobody did. By 1:30, they were all gone. I closed the casket, wheeled it to the back, and Marcus took it to the crematory that afternoon. The whole thing was done by 3. I sat in the office with the door closed for a while after that, not because I was scared. I wasn't, really. I was tired in a way I couldn't place, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. Around 4, one of the other prep techs, a guy who'd been with us maybe 2 years, poked his head in and asked how the service went. I said, fine. He said, good. And then he said, kind of casual, hey, did you end up doing anything with his face? Dave said something about it yesterday. Dave was our night guy. Semi-retired, came in 3 evenings a week to do overflow. I said, what did he say? He shrugged. I don't know. I just heard him mention it in the break room. He said the guy had a strange face. That's all he said. I figured maybe there was something you had to work around. I said no, nothing to work around. Everything was fine. He nodded and went back down the hall. I didn't go find Dave. I could have. He was on that night. I saw his car in the lot when I left at 6. I walked right past the prep room door, and I heard him in there running water, and I didn't stop. I got in my car and drove home, and I don't know why I didn't ask him. I've thought about it since, and I still don't know. I worked at that place for another 2 years. I saw Dave probably 100 more times. We talked about the bills, about his grandkids, about the roof leak in the West Chapel. I never brought Ronald up, and neither did he. I don't think he knew that I'd been the one to close him. The stitches on the lower lid would have dissolved in the fire along with everything else. Nobody would ever have seen them. The family got the urn on Monday. I still do the sewing now, on every one of them. It only takes 2 minutes, and it's the kind of thing you'd rather do for nothing 1,000 times than skip once. I did 9 years on a maintenance of way gang out of Birmingham before I asked to move to daylight. This is why. October 2019, middle of the month. One of those weeks where it rains every evening, and by 2 in the morning, the ballast still smells wet. We were on a stretch of track south of the city, past the yard, out where the line runs behind a strip of pine woods, and there's nothing on either side but drainage ditches and the back of a scrapyard. Real quiet spot. No houses close enough to see a light. We had a track window from midnight to 4. Standard job. Replace worn tie plates and a batch of loose anchors on about half a mile of rail. 5 of us in the crew, plus the foreman, a guy everyone called Wit. He'd been on the railroad since the 80s and had a way of talking where he never used 2 words if one would do. For efficiency, he split us up. Kept 3 guys on the north end with him, changing anchors, and sent me and another guy, Denton, down to the south end to work through the plates. Denton was maybe 300 meters up from me. I could see the shape of his headlamp when he stood up straight, and that was it. I want to be clear about the layout. The track runs pretty near straight through there. You can see a long way if your light reaches. That night, we had a low fog sitting on the ballast, maybe knee-high, which is normal after rain when the ground is warmer than the air. Above the fog, everything was clear, stars showing through the gaps in the pines. I had my head down. You get into a rhythm on plates. Loosen, pull, set the new one, drive the spikes. It's loud work up close, but the sound doesn't carry far because the ballast eats it. I remember I was on my knees on a folded piece of cardboard because the rock was soaking my pants through. I looked up because my back was cramping and I wanted to check on Denton's light. It was still there, small, steady. Between me and him, there was a person walking. I want to say I froze, but I didn't. My first thought was that one of the guys had come down from the north end for some reason. Maybe Whit sent someone. I sat back on my heels and watched. The figure was walking away from me, up the track, toward Denton, not toward the north crew. That's the part I noticed second. If it was one of ours, he'd have gone the other way. He was walking on the ties, not the ballast, which is what you do when you don't want to turn an ankle in the dark. So he knew the track. That registered. I reached for my lantern and did the signal. Too long, hold, too long. That's the protocol. If you're out on the right-of-way at night and you see someone, you light them up. It's for their safety and yours. Anybody who's on track legally knows the signal and will turn and answer with their own light. He didn't turn. He didn't slow. Same pace, same distance from Denton, which, as I watched, I realized wasn't closing. Denton's light hadn't moved. The figure had been walking the whole time I'd been looking at him, and he was still about the same distance from me. 40 meters maybe. I stood up. I yelled, "Hey, hey, on the track!" Nothing. I'll be honest about what I was feeling then, because later I tried to talk myself into it being no big deal. It wasn't fear yet. It was more like the feeling you get when you're driving and something's wrong with the car, but you can't tell what. Something in the pattern wasn't right, and my body knew before my head did. I brought the lantern up and put the beam on him directly. Our lanterns are strong. On the high setting, you can read a rail number at 200 feet. I hit him full in the back. He turned around. I need to describe this the way I saw it, because I've had 4 years to think about how to say it, and I still don't think I do it justice. He turned. His body turned. His shoulders squared toward me. He was wearing what looked like a dark work jacket, jeans, boots, regular clothes, regular build, maybe a little taller than average. And where his face should have been, there was nothing. I don't mean it was dark. I don't mean shadow. The lantern was on him. I could see the collar of the jacket, the stubble of hair on the top of his head, the shape of his ears. The face itself, from the hairline down to the throat, was just not there. Like somebody had cut that piece out of the picture and left the wall behind it, except there was no wall, just what was past him, rail and fog. I lowered the lantern. I don't know why. Some part of me thought if I stopped looking, he'd stop being there. When I brought it back up, he was in the same spot, not walking anymore, facing me. I keyed the radio on my vest. Whit, South End. "I need somebody down here." Whit came back fast, not panicked, just fast. "What you got?" I couldn't think of how to say it. I said, "There's a guy on the track. He won't answer up." A pause. "Denton see him?" I looked past the figure. Denton's headlamp was moving. He was working. He hadn't looked up. "Denton doesn't see him." Another pause. Longer. Then Whit said, "Stay where you are. Don't move up. We're coming." I heard the high rail start on the north end. The engine sound carried further than voices. And while I was listening to that, watching the figure, I noticed his shoulders were still square to me, but the top of his head wasn't right, tilted too far to one side, like he was listening too. I kept the light on him. My hand was cramping on the lantern grip. I remember that specifically because later I had to work my fingers open one at a time. The high rail's headlights came around the bend behind me and washed the whole cut in white. For a second, everything went flat and colorless. The figure was gone. Not walked away, not stepped off the track. Gone in the space between one blink and the next, while I had light on him. Whit and 2 others got out. Whit had his own lantern up. He walked past me without saying anything and went about 40 meters up the track, right to where the figure had been standing. He crouched. He shone his light down on the ballast. Then he walked another 10 feet and did the same, then another 10. He came back and he said, "There's no prints." I said, "There have to be." He said, "There aren't." Denton had come down by then. He'd seen the high rail and figured something was wrong. He asked what happened, and Whit said, "Nothing. Let's finish up." Just like that. He didn't tell Denton what I'd said on the radio. He didn't tell him to look at the ballast. But when we were walking back to the truck at the end of the shift, Whit hung back with me. He waited until the others were out of earshot, and he said, "That stretch is old." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It's just old. Things happen on it sometimes. Not often, but sometimes." I asked him what kind of things. He looked at me for a while. He had a face like a piece of leather that had been left in a truck for 20 years. He said, "You saw what you saw. Don't work it alone." That was the whole conversation. I finished the shift. I finished the week. I didn't work alone again. If the schedule put me out on my own, I'd trade with somebody, or I'd stay closer to the gang than the job needed, close enough to see faces. Nobody gave me trouble about it. I think Whit told them something, or maybe he didn't have to. In January, I put in for days. My wife thought it was because of the baby, and I let her think that. My supervisor didn't ask. He signed the transfer and shook my hand and said the day gang was lucky to have me. I've been on days since. I don't go out on that south stretch at all if I can help it. And the funny thing is, nobody assigns me to it either. I don't know if that's coincidence. I asked a guy who retired last year, been on that line since 1991, if he'd ever heard anything about that piece of track. He thought about it a while. He said there was a section foreman in the 90s who wouldn't send anybody down there past 2 in the morning, wouldn't say why, wrote it into the work orders, and nobody argued with him because he was good at his job and the trains ran on time. I asked what happened to him. The guy said he retired and moved to Florida and died a few years later. Normal stuff, heart. I said, "Did he ever tell you what was down there?" He said, "No, and I never asked." You don't ask a man like that. You just work the shift he tells you to work. That's the story. I don't know what I saw. I've thought about it more times than I want to admit, and every explanation I come up with has a hole in it. A person can't stand on wet ballast without leaving prints. A person's face doesn't stop being there while you have a light on it. A person doesn't step out of a beam of light without stepping anywhere. I'm not asking anybody to believe me. I'm telling it because my kid is old enough now to ask why I don't work nights, and I don't want to lie to him forever. When he's older, I'll tell him some version, probably shorter than this one. If you work on the railroad, and you're out on your own past midnight, and you see somebody walking on the ties who won't answer your light, don't put the beam on his face. Radio your foreman and keep your light low until somebody gets to you.